Welcome in, everyone, to Flyover Footy.
Hello, everyone.
Phil, it's end of season celebration, right? Everything's great, fantastic, wonderful. We're all super excited. There's nothing wrong with anything in the world, and we get to talk about it, right?
Yeah, no one's upset. Everything is running smoothly as we all suspected it would. Everything is in its right place. All the decisions are being made with lots of thought
and
and feeling
and by
put
the
into them.
people who we want to be making them for the long-term benefit of the club, who have the resume, the history, the experience to be making the decisions, well thought out. There's obviously a 5-year plan in place, just like there was. We're good. This is a laid back, chill episode. Well, I mean,
Amazing.
we had one sporting director with a 5-year plan. I assume that the next one's going to have a similar one, though the next one may be already on the payroll.
I hope so. That would be ideal, right?
That depends on
And
who it is, I suppose.
5-year plan. Maybe they'll have like a 3-year plan based on how it went last time if we're negative, but no, hopefully they have like a 10 or 20-year plan. That's what I would love to see in the next sports director.
Yeah.
Sporting director.
Yep. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Obviously starting this one off a little tongue in cheek because it's kind of what you have to do right now. It's a weird week. Phil's usually the one who starts off the show saying like, it's a weird week, or it's something, it's not quite normal. And I don't know, the vibes are off. There's no getting around that. The vibes are off for the start of an off season that I mean, there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
So if you're tuning into us on the live stream, this is going to be a vibes based show. I was telling Phil beforehand. I was like, we've got stats, we've got things to talk about, we've got facts and all that, but it's very much gonna be a vibes based episode. And in fact, I forgot to include something on our show notes, Phil, that I wanted to talk about as far as the season recap. So I'm gonna add that right before we get started. And if you're just joining us, don't like dead air, but feel free to drop a question in the chat if you've got anything popping around in your brain about the process, the things that have gone on this week, players that we brought back, the decisions themselves, because it's not just the process, it's not just the circumstances around it, it's the players themselves, because they're going to make up the core of 2026. So what do you think? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Did we sign too many? Did we execute too many player options? There's a lot to take in on that, in addition to just the process that will be driving City going forward, right?
Yeah. A lot to think on today.
I'm making stuff up on the fly for our show notes. I hate dead air, but Phil, we can go ahead and get started on the pod recording whenever you're ready.
I wanted to make sure you had your contract.
That's the
negotiations in there. I wanted to make sure I had a good list. Yep, I was doing the same thing on a much lower level. Okay, I will hit record and we'll go. Welcome everyone to a postseason special episode of Flyover Footy. I don't have to do the radio drop, do I, Matt? This is just for us. Vibes only.
Yeah, it's vibes only. Radio. We might air this one on KTRS. And you know what? KTRS listeners don't often get to hear the vibes that we do on the wind down. So that's what this is going to be. There's no match to preview. There's no match looking ahead. So you know what?
Ooh, little wind down vibe now.
Little wind down vibe for everything. So settle in, because this is going to be not just a season recap, a look back at what St. Louis City did in 2025, post-mortem, if you will. But it has been for better or for worse, it has been an active offseason in the last 5 days or so.
Absolutely, it has for St. Louis City. especially. So as we get started here, you sounds like you will be listening on the Big 550 KTRS. We will continue that tradition throughout this show as we push through. And I'll just give you guys a little foreshadowing of what we're going to be talking about today. It'll be timeline oriented. It will go in order of time, in that we will kind of start with the recap of the season a little bit, talk about that moving into the off season, the option news, and there's a lot to talk about with that, more specifically with the sporting director decision and these decisions being made. Maybe some player awards. We'll talk about Roman Burke's contract. City 2 will be closing out this show. We'll end on good vibes because that
Yes.
is very good news. So I want to give you guys a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today as you stick with us on the Big 550 KTRS and, of course, on our feed and on the podcast. So thank you for joining us, Matt. Lots been happening ever since the closing of the season. One of the biggest ones, though, for us personally, for those who have come in contact with Vinco, some big news was dropped. I'll let you handle this, Matt, because you'll do a bit of a better job.
Yeah, for those unfamiliar, our friend Vinco has been with St. Louis City before it became St. Louis City. When MLS for the Lou first launched, and there were, I think, 3, maybe 4 total people at this startup of an organization. Our friend Vinco was one of those people. And this week he announced, actually, just as we're recording this on a Wednesday, he just announced that he is departing St. Louis City SC after 6 years with the club. He is joining 9 PBS as the director of community engagement. So we wish Vin not just a fond farewell from the official soccer duties that he has as he moves on to this next venture in making the community of St. Louis continuously a better place in that role. But honestly, just thanking him for his efforts and for his work, not just with St. Louis City, but to get St. Louis City started, to help lobby MLS to make St. Louis an expansion city, to work alongside Lutz Pfannenstiel, scouting all of those different clubs, colleges, communities that they went to. He was side by side with Lutz Pfannenstiel all those months in trekking throughout the Midwest, in going and finding Miggy Perez out in Boonville, I think it was, in going north, south, east, and west, all over the place, watching soccer and scouting out everyone locally that they could to help build the academy, then the 2 team. And as the director of team operations, I believe his final position was called, but just a fantastic resume, a fantastic work. And honestly, everybody who is a St. Louis City fan owes Vinco a little bit of a debt of gratitude because of the work he put in throughout this to get St. Louis City from a concept in MLS for the Lou that the Taylors and the Kavanaughs have, and he helped to execute from the very beginning onto the St. Louis City that we know, love, and care about today.
Yeah, my first conversation with Vin was, I think he was the liaison for supporters. And so he was just kind of introducing himself to a bunch of people who were kind of already in the soccer world, getting opinions. It was so
Yep.
kind that I got to kind of talk to him about that. I felt honored that I was even asked my opinion about anything. And he was very gracious. He was amazing. And, his hiring and a few others were kind of a signal to me. I was talking about, I want some kind of St. Louis flavor, or at least someone who agrees with the vibes of the St. Louis soccer community
Mm-hmm.
to be in the front office, in the technical roles, even at least one. Right. And
Yep.
so then was like, obviously I was looking for that even when the thing started. I was like, what are we going to see here? We're going to see anyone that cares about the community at all. So we got Vin, who was already doing amazing things in the community. City was lucky to get him, in my opinion, and he served us well from what I've experienced. So best of luck to Vin, and thanks for all you did, man. Yeah, great get for St. Louis, and a big loss as he moves on to the next thing.
Absolutely.
Which is STL PBS. So that's exciting too. So I'm sure we'll see good stuff from him.
And they've got tons of community events and
we lost Matt. Last time he came right back. Oh no. Well, I will kill time. I'm going to pause it here. We're at 5:57. I'll catch up on some of these comments here. We got a great group here. We got Byron Tim, Abo's here, Joseph Iliff, Aaron Leak. Just killing time here. Jerry's here.
Hey there.
We got a great crowd. I paused it on my recording, so that might help you edit.
Can you see me again?
Yes. Oh yeah, I see you back.
Okay.
I hear you. Do you want me to hit record? Do you remember what you were saying there? Something about community?
Yeah, you can just move on. We can start with the next subject.
Okay. I'll hit record and we'll move on to the next thing. All right. Again, all the best to Vin as he moves on to the next thing. 9 PBS in St. Louis. I'm excited to see what comes of that community engagement too. So that kind of goes back to his roots, his first job in St. Louis with the club. All right, Matt, let's move on to the recap of the season. I think, if you listen to the last 5 to 10 games, especially once we were out of the playoffs, we've had these vibes already. So we're going to kind of move past this quickly, but I think we need a quick reminder and definitely a conversation about the direction the club's been going since Olaf, as we even talk about Olaf. So why don't you lead us off with maybe what it looked like under Olaf and what's happened since?
Yeah, I think so. People have been looking at David Critchley's overall points per game as a metric for whether he should get the job or not. And as of we're recording this, no announcement has been made about either the sporting director or head coach. So David Critchley's tenure through 19 games was 1.105 points per game. Not overly impressive, but let's backtrack for just a second because this season is a little easier than a lot of seasons and then the 2 seasons past, I think, to do a recap. There's essentially a Jekyll and a Hyde version of this season. There is City under Olaf, City under Critchley, 15 games through Olaf Melberg, 19 games through David Critchley. So it's not quite even, but it's pretty even. A little more even than what Bradley Carnell, John Hackworth had in 2024. And it's such a marked change that occurred. So we go back to the beginning of 2025. And as tough as it is to think about it right now, 2025 started off with some pretty good vibes. We had a 4-game unbeaten streak to start this season. 2 draws against Colorado and San Diego. San Diego, who went on to win the Western Conference. We drew them right off the bat in a horribly boring game, having attended that game and knowing that we had 0.1 XG in that game. That's 0.1 XG in that game. 2 draws to start off the season, both scoreless. So that set the tone for everything that would come on this non-effective attack and also defense that was allowing 0.2, 1.0 XGA and 0 goals allowed. So the tone was set from the beginning for Olaf Melberg and what he tried to do. But then the next 2 games offered a pretty big window of opportunity into what Olaf could produce. Back-to-back wins, the only back-to-back wins. The only 2 MLS wins of Olaf Melberg's tenure came in the 3rd and 4th game, 3-0 against the Galaxy and 1-0 against Seattle. The Seattle game, that was the Edu Leuven goal, but the LA Galaxy game was the hope, right? At that time, all of our hopes in 2025 cling to that LA Galaxy game where we unloaded for 3 goals, 2.0 XG. It was a little more open playing that Galaxy team in Carson at Dignity Health away. But then the wheels just completely came off the wagon on this one. And it started, unfortunately, with Bradley Carnell. So you can be argued that Bradley Carnell is actually the one who started the death knell of Olaf Melberg as the St. Louis City manager, because after 4 straight unbeaten, 2 draws and 2 wins, we traveled to Philadelphia in that very unmemorable game, losing 1-0 and having, again, 0.2 XG to our name in that game. Then it was followed by losses to Austin FC, to Sporting KC, where we went scoreless in all 3 of those games. So at this point, we had scored 4 goals in 8 matches, and those 4 goals were scored in only 2. After losing to SKC, we finally scored 1, but lost 2-1 against Columbus. So that's a 4-game losing streak off the heels of that 4-game unbeaten. Suddenly, we're looking like we're collapsing under the weight of ourselves under Olaf. The next 2 are draws. 0-0 against Vancouver, 2-2 against LAFC. At least we were scoring against LAFC, but this was not the same LAFC we played later in the season with Son and Bawanga. This one, just had Bawanga, but they were a little less bite to them. And then it was a 4-1 loss to Seattle. And that to me was this was where fans really started to turn, where you had back-to-back draws, you had points that you were taking, one of them away. And then at this match against Seattle, towards the end of Olaf's tenure, this was right before the US Open Cup. This was the weekend before the US Open Cup in May 3rd against Seattle 4-1. This to me is the game that really torched us and sent fans over the edge of sorts. And that was the point where we were saying, if we lose in the US Open Cup, we got to start talking about Olaf's future. This comes only 11 games into the season, where fans, I remember, were starting to call for Olaf at this time. We win the US Open Cup against Union Omaha 2-0. Vibes start to climb back a little bit, saying, okay, MLS is not going well, but maybe we can make a run in the Open Cup. We bounce back in MLS play and we lose 2-1 against San Diego. We had a 2-2 draw against Sporting at home. That was a horrible draw against Sporting. I'm sure we all have wanted to forget about that. And then it was the Minnesota back-to-back. It was a loss 3-0 in MLS play and a loss 3-2 to be eliminated from the US Open Cup in May. May is obviously the month where Olaf had that opportunity where he had to take some points, and he ended up, I think there was one total point in MLS out of, I want to say 4 or 5 games. And then he had the unceremonious dumping from the US Open Cup in May. He ended his tenure right before the end of May, second to last week in May, a loss to Colorado, 1-0. And that was it for Olaf. He ended his tenure through 15 games with 2 total wins and a 0.73 points per game. Phil, it's hard to argue that this isn't the worst possible case scenario of a coaching hire and the first 15 games that set the tone for City. But the worst thing to me is that Olaf didn't just lose games this season. 15 games into the season, 2 total wins. It wasn't just the wins and losses. It was what that did to our team. It's what that did to our morale, what that did to our form, what that did to our confidence. And I think comments from Bradley Carnell, from Klaus, from Berkey, Totland, Hartle, all of these players that we've talked to and we've heard from other outlets talk to really reinforced just how broken this team was. It wasn't as overt of a brokenness as far as the locker room goes from last year. This is different. This was different after Olaf. So, and it's really frustrating as a City fan to have to talk about brokenness 2 years in a row when it comes to your players. But I remember last season when right before Bradley Carnell was let go, Chris Durkin was talking about how the locker room was fractured. Like all of those interpersonal issues, the head coaching issues with the players that were developing, and whether that means factions or whatever were occurring, Durkin told us the locker room is fractured. They were feeling broken in the locker room amongst each other. This was more a case of, it felt like the team was together. They were just beaten down. They were told how to play under Olaf, but it very much manifested itself into we can't lose. We cannot concede, as opposed to we need to win. We need to press. We need to score. It was not that at all under Olaf, and that identity shift of the team completely derailed everything. And that's what David Critchley had to pick up the pieces on when he first started playing. And it was the new manager bounce, right? It was 2-1 win against San Jose, but then it was just, we have so much work to do. Critchley has so much work to do to fix these players, where you can't ride the vibes of a new manager bounce playing for you've got that spark for one game. You can't just ride on the spark. You have to redo, reshape, remold, reinvigorate these players and this team. And it took Critchley a long time to do that. So after the first game, vibes were high on, oh yeah, maybe Critchley can do this. Maybe he can take this. Maybe he can pull a Cinderella story. But then you look at starting in June, we had 4 games in June, and it went loss, draw, loss, loss. And we continued into July with another loss where we're just bleeding goals. I think almost all of those had an expected goals against of well over 2.0. So Critchley's, he had shifted things where he's saying we need to start scoring, and that manifested itself into a 2-1, 3, and 2 goal outburst, but it manifested also into a 1, 2, 3, and 4 goals against. So he can't find the balance, and he won't find the balance for quite a while in 2025. You get wins against Portland 2-1. You get a win against Nashville 3-1 at home. That's probably the win that Critchley puts his feather in his cap on for 2025 because of how Nashville finished this season. But it's so up and down. He can't find the balance throughout this season into July, into August, where there's a win against Portland, then 2 losses against FC Dallas, Minnesota, a win against Nashville, 3 losses against Chicago, Vancouver, and Houston. And then he starts his home stretch, right? And that Vancouver game in particular, that was the one where Mekhi Joyner was called for that phantom penalty that I was completely outraged on. And I don't think I've ever lost my cool as much as I did on the fallout from that play because of what it cost us. You have that as a draw, and I think things get markedly better as much as they finish strong. I think that is the thing you build off of if you're able to go into Vancouver at the time, a top 3 team in MLS in the West, and you draw them, you take a point from them, from St. Louis, one of the worst teams at the time in the league. But that didn't happen. So they end up with this Chicago, Vancouver, Houston, 3 losses in a row. And at that point, it's Critchley's not the guy. I was saying it publicly. I'll go back on the tapes and I'll own it. At that point, it was Critchley had wins against San Jose, Portland, and Nashville in about a 13 game stretch. And 3 wins in 13 games or so, that's not head coaching material. And so at the time, I said David Critchley is not the guy for the job. He's clearly not able to put this together. But you know what? The season wasn't over. We still had 6 games left to go, and he pulled it together. A draw, a win, a loss against the hottest team in Major League Soccer, LAFC, and then a win and a draw. So to me, pulling it together takes him from that overall 1.105 points per game to the last 13 being 1.31, the last 10 being 1.4, and the last 6 being 1.83. So to me, it's inarguable that David Critchley has taken this team to the finish line of a place that we really never thought they would be at, where they ended up just 9 points out of the playoff race, out of the playoff spot, and at a points per game in 13, 10, and 6 games to go of all being playoff teams. That, like, to this year in the Western Conference, a 1.29 points per game would put you in 7th place, and 3 teams tied with 1.21 for the 9th and final playoff spot. Critchley's last 13 games was a 1.31. He's in, but it gets better from there as he goes. And that's my point, is that 2025 is a tale of 2 coaches, a tale of 2 teams, but it ended in a shockingly surprising, a shockingly positive manner, I think, that speaks to David Critchley. It speaks to the players he had at his disposal and what they were able to pull together when healthy. But it also speaks to what he was able to do for their confidence, their form, and their ability to play together in a style that better suited them. So that's what we ended 2025 on. And I think that's the takeaway to me, is that through all of the inconsistencies of Critchley, taking everything that Olaf did and tossing it into the garbage can, including what he did to the players' confidence, morale, and form, and just take what David Critchley turned this team into down the stretch. And you end up with this fact that had we not conceded all those goals after the 70, 75th, 80th minute, where you can easily find 9 points plus that we gave away throughout the season because we gave up late goals. If we hadn't done that, we're a playoff team, even throughout all this madness that occurred this season.
Yeah, and taking that away just quickly while we're on that topic is clearly things needed to get fixed, and defense was the last thing that Critchley fixed, according to his City Voice interview. So I don't put that on Critchley in any way. I put it on how many of those lost points were under Olaf. You know what I mean? So I definitely put the blame on Olaf there, and I know you weren't implying that. Sorry, Matt, but I just want to say one thing about Olaf. You did kind of imply this, and it's that we lost so much time under him. Not only did he teach a bad style, stick to a bad style, kill the confidence, like you said, but we built a team for Olaf. It was a changing of setup, I guess, is the best way to say that. Wasn't supposed to be a big change of tactics, but we were going to a 3 center back system. We were bringing in wing backs and making that a priority, and building around having less defensive 6s and more center mid 8s. And that we built a team around that, and all that time was lost, a lot of that. And so that, among so many other problems, to me, that was the biggest issue. The biggest penalty that we paid this season was all that time lost, because again, under Carnell, we've already lost time getting rid of Carnell, which felt like when he got fired before we had all the rumored details, I was like, this is way too soon. What are we
Yep.
doing? Whereas with Olaf, it was like, I think it was that 7 center back game where I was like, okay, I think I've seen enough here. And I was pretty much on board with him leaving, which is a freaking big statement because of that time loss. But in the end, they made the decision, and we cut the line on losing time, and we've been rebuilding ever since. And if you look at it that way, and you look at the improvement in this team, not just in points, but you see that first thing they worked on was attack. Next thing they worked on was bringing in a better defender and trying to hold out games once we scored. And even the points per game went down a little bit. I think you might have mentioned that, Matt. And now we've found a really nice balance at the end. We've found that St. Louis can defend in a block when it's that time. And we've seen them press under Critchley throughout his tenure. That's been pretty good. We've seen the team score goals. It feels like goals are inevitable for the most part if the chances are there and we finish them. We see stats having to do with field tilt. We see the good of that. We see when it doesn't work that those stats still look pretty similar, and that there were opportunities to win. So my point is, something is building, and Critchley even talked about in City Voice. I think he wasn't sure about his confidence of his tactical moves, his vision for the club, for the way they were going to play. But eventually, it feels like with some wins, he got that confidence, and I think he's been leading us in a very good direction. It's definitely been positive. Everything points that out, and I think that if we now, having stopped losing time for quite a long time, we'll talk about the options later. But we've stopped losing massive ground. We've put our foot in the ground and we're moving forward bit by bit by bit. And now we have an off season that we get to build. And I think that's a good transition. Although, Matt, I'll give you one more chance to say anything you want to do. I just wanted to kind of leave this as we transition out of this bad, crazy, terrible, awful season in whole. I feel very confident that things are going to improve and things will be at least medium good throughout most of next season. I think if the plan goes well, and if they make good offseason, even decent offseason decisions, I'm feeling pretty good.
I just want to add a couple of stats to frame what you were saying that kind of sum up 2025 to me anyway. First, the allowing goals at the end of the games was an Olaf issue. I want to reinforce that with the fact that before Olaf's final game, I had pulled that City had allowed 13 goals after 60 minutes in their last 7 games in all comps. This is right before Olaf was fired. Last 7 games, 13 goals after the 60th minute. That's egregious. That's you can't do that and expect to have any positive results. So that was bleeding goals when Olaf's mantra was defense, defense, defense. He couldn't see out games. He couldn't have his players in position to be able to mentally carry it for 90 minutes. His nonstop players that he talked about in the preseason of 2025 was a myth. Never came to be, never was realized. The players never bought into his version of that. And so it was terrible. But the other factor in this season is that our lack of finishing, our inability to finish, despite having a pretty decent XG overall. If you look at our expected goals number, we're pretty much middle of the pack. We end up as right in the middle of the pack, middle third of Major League Soccer in expected goals. But if you look at the stat that we've been talking about week to week on Flyover, non-penalty goals minus expected goals, meaning how many goals do you actually score compared to what your XG says in non-penalty situations, we were second to last in Major League Soccer. We scored 10 and a half fewer non-penalty goals than our XG said we should. Only Atlanta United, who just, I think, fired their head coach, finished worse than us at 11.6 below. Only 2 teams to have double-digit expected goals higher than your actual goals scored. We couldn't finish anything for a huge period of time. Even when we were creating chances, we couldn't finish. So that was the other thing that really mars 2025 to me. But it wasn't all terrible. By the end of the season, like if you look at some individual stats, by the end of the season, we actually had 2 double-digit goal scorers, and we didn't have any last season. So at least we turned things around to that point. You had you had Hartle with 10 and Hartle with 9, Klaus with 10. What I meant to say is you had 2 double-digit goal contributors, which we didn't have last season either. Klaus had 10 goals and 2 assists in Major League Soccer competition. Hartle had 9 goals, 4 assists. Marcel Hartle actually led the team in goal contributions, goals plus assists with 13. And Edu Leuven, for as little as Leuven actually played cumulatively throughout this season, he only played in 19 and started in 16, if you can believe that. He started less than half the games that we played because of the stops and starts, the personal things going on. And he still had 6 goals and 3 assists, 9 goal contributions in the season. That's good for third on the team. So those 3, I mean, the team mostly lived and died by those 3. So improvements over 2024 overall, but you have to credit that to Critchley, what he was able to turn the team into, and the players buying into that as much down the stretch, especially with Klaus and Hartle leading the charge.
Yep. And we're going to talk about roster building, but one of the things, let's just move on actually, because we have a lot to talk about and we have a big topic that's going to take a lot of time today. But let's start with player awards. Matt, I guess this is from us. I didn't see any of this listed, so we are going to give our player awards.
Surprise! I wanted to drop this on you to get your knee-jerk reactions. No research. We're going off vibes for this show. I want us to give our MVP of the team, our defensive player of the year, our U22 of the year, our most improved player, and our coach of the year. Those are the 5 categories that I've pulled. Could be others. Honestly, it's been a rough week, and so these are what I pulled together. I'll go first to get you started, Phil, on where you want to go with yours. And obviously we can say the same name multiple times. My MVP is Marcel Hartle. Not just because he had 9 goals, 4 assists, 13 goals and assists. There is no player on our team who has run more, covered more ground, played more positions, I feel, and was asked to do more, never complained, and always produced no matter where he was asked to play and what his role needed to be. How many times this season did we say Marcel Hartle needs to be in the attack? Because he was required under Olaf mainly to come further back. He played a 6 at times during this season because of injuries. Yeah. But at the same time, that just shows his importance, is that Marcel Hartle is the kind of player who you don't take off the field under any circumstance, but he can shift on the field depending on where you absolutely need him. So for instance, he played the 6th earlier this season when we were without Leuven and Durkin for a period of time because we needed that stability. We needed that kind of player, the quickness, the incredible ball skills that Marcel Hartle has, as opposed to somebody that we can slide in the attack, where maybe you'll put a Salio up there with Klaus, Betcher, and Teuscher, that kind of thing, where Hartle, yes, he's better than all of them at the attacking midfielder role, but it's more valuable to St. Louis where he's a part of the buildup. So Marcel Hartle overall is my MVP of the team, not just because of the stats, but what he put in. 34 matches played, 34 matches started. If I look at this, I can confirm Marcel Hartle is not just the only City player to play more than 30 games. Marcel Hartle is the only City player to play every game and start every game. Both of those matches played and starts, only player, and he logged over 3,000 minutes this season. Marcel Hartle is Mr. Fix-It, Mr. Do-It-All, absolute MVP for me.
Yeah, and he did that. He stayed healthy through the Olaf era, which, what was it? 1 and 2 players was able to pull off.
Not everybody can say that.
And he was doing it with all the things that Matt mentioned, all those minutes played, all the ground covered. That's massive. And in these other categories, I might choose someone different just to give a little bit of a difference in what we're talking about, but you cannot move away from Hartle as MVP in this category. He's the best. And the only thing I would say to add on to what Matt said is it didn't matter how bad, how incohesive this team was, Hartle still looked good. And Hartle still was able to create chances, score goals, so he's just a step above. He is a DP. He's the best DP probably St. Louis has had so far. And that includes Berkey. That's a big thing to say, but I think he's proved it this year. He's changed. I wonder how many games he's won just like through his contributions. You can say that about Berkey too, or games we haven't lost because of Berkey. But Hartle's up there, if not the best for me personally.
And there's a question in the chat of curious about league-wide distance covered leaders from Aaron Leak. And as this was from August 26th, so it was missing last couple of months of the season. But through August 26th, Marcel Hartle had 204 miles logged. That was through about 2/3 of the season. So you can look at probably around 300 miles or so logged by Marcel Hartle. He is undoubtedly top 5. He topped Anders Dreyer, Hani Mukhtar, Jeppe Verskov, Alhassan Yusuf, Diego Rossi. Marcel Hartle was the only player at that time with over 200 miles logged. That plus the 3,000 minutes, and the fact that he was able to have 13 goals and assists. Almost had, if he had converted that PK in the last game, he would have had double-digit goal scoring. But there's nobody who did it better than Marcel Hartle for the entire year cumulatively.
Great. So Matt, what would be your who would be your defensive player of the year?
Henry Kessler. But Henry Kessler. Henry Kessler didn't play enough, but we didn't have a consistent backline, a consistent defense for me to say that you have to have a minutes restriction for your defensive player of the year. When he was out there, Henry Kessler was the best that we had, bar none. I would struggle to come up with anybody else who had as big of an impact on a series of games that Henry Kessler did. And you go back to the very beginning of the season when we were talking about defensive player of the year because of how many clearances he had, talking about a defensive-minded St. Louis team. Henry Kessler was the anchor of that team. He continued throughout the season. Injuries bogged down his season to an extreme extent. So it's really unfortunate that we didn't get to see more Henry Kessler. But his defensive work was just absolutely outstanding as that kind of fallback guy. So in the 3 center back look earlier this season, he was the central center back. When we dropped back into a 2 center back look under Critchley, he was the right side, but he dropped back, especially when Falou Fall came on. Falou Fall was the roamer. I think you like to say he went wandering or on his walkabouts. He went on his walkabouts. Yeah. Yes, I love that phrase. So Fall would go on his walkabouts. He did recently. Kessler was the stay-at-home guy. Kessler was our safety net, of course, of sorts. And when we didn't have in the game, it was noticeable when he was injured and we didn't have his presence. That's why, honestly, right now it hits so hard to have Henry Kessler's option declined. And we'll talk about it in a minute on why that was the case. But defensive player of the year, Henry Kessler to me.
And I agree with that. And in fact, if depending on what you were going to say, I was going to have to be like, well, Kessler didn't play enough. So I guess, Kessler when he was available and then Baumgartel when he was available. And I'm leaving out Fall for now because we'll get to talk about him, I think, later. But I'll just say that Kessler is just such a good all-around center back because he is a good passer. And he is good with the ball at his feet. I don't know how many times, even in the last several weeks, he was dribbling so far forward. And I love it. I think he's reliable in doing that. He doesn't just lose the ball and have to sprint back. He usually gets rid of it in a good way and pulls a bunch of defenders / pressing attackers. So it's wonderful. Love to see that. I agree with you, but I would say Baumgartel, when he would come into Olaf's team, he was a big missing piece because we were sitting back so much. And I remember there would just be this gap, if players got bypassed or if a long ball was sent into the midfield, not the back line, there would be like free balls to these guys and they'd turn and go and there'd be like a mini transition phase there, just not even after build out, you know what I'm saying, from the other team. And when Baumgartel came in and he started disrupting the midfield, I want to say that was like a big change that was badly needed. And it almost feels like he went and did that on his own. It doesn't feel like someone told him to do that.
Well, at the beginning of the season,
the Olaf thing, right? Like, what is this madness? Who is organizing this? Why is it so incohesive? It felt like players were just doing what they do and trying to win games. And the last thing I'll say about Baumgartel is that he was physical. He would disrupt the midfield. He was good 1v1, and he would be pretty careful about not getting beat in behind. And Kess was good at cleaning that kind of stuff up when they played together. So anyway, I liked that. I wanted to throw that in there for my backup plan if Kessler wasn't in.
Well, we forget the microcosm of the end of the season, but Timo Baumgartel, who at the very beginning of the season said he loved being on the ball. That was his thing. And that's why we were so excited for him under Olaf and building out of the back, because he brought that pedigree to St. Louis. The crazy thing is, when all was said and done, Timo Baumgartel started 22 games. It started 20 and appeared in 22. Kyle Hebert started 19 and appeared in 22. Kyle Hebert played 60 less minutes than Timo Baumgartel.
Hmm.
Do you remember at the beginning of the season, it was Kyle Hebert who ended up having the longest streak of consecutive starts to open this season, longer than Roman Berkey when he went down with his finger injury.
Mhm.
That's absolute insanity to me. Last thing I'll say is when you talk about stats defensively, Henry Kessler was the only St. Louis City player to have triple-digit clearances, which speaks to his safety net type of work. 104 clearances. Hebert had 92. Baumgartel had 85. You look at tackles and interceptions, defensive work again. Conrad Vollum, Akil Watts, and Celio Pompeu led the team in tackles plus interceptions. Just pure tackles, which you don't have to be a defender to have tackles, obviously. Vollum, Pompeu, and Ostrak. So a lot of the midfielders, a lot of that middle area of the field. And then as far as blocked shots go, it's Timo Baumgartel with 36 leading the team, Kyle Hebert, and then Conrad Vollum with 33. Conrad Vollum making himself kind of a push for that defensive player of the year conversation with how his stats ended up at least. So interesting on that. The next award that we have, Phil, let's run through these real quick. U22 of the year. Now, last year I had fun with this because we never played U22s. So I had to make it a U24 of the year. And I think Jay Reed qualified for that or something crazy like that. Maybe Thomas Totland.
And I got mad at the club for that.
Yes.
You having to do that.
Yes, you absolutely did. But we're looking at players like right now I've got ages. JGR is 21, Song Bin is 23, Falou Fall is 21. You got to go all the way down to the supplemental roster right now. Caden Glover, Makai Joyner, Miguel Perez, Tyson Pierce, Christian Oliveras, Haziel Orozco, that's a candidate. Oliveras is 23, sorry. And then Joey Zielinski. So you're looking at probably like Zielinski, Orozco, Song Bin, Falou Fall, JGR as your candidates here. Joyner.
Because I'm a bit of a tie, and I think you'll take one of them.
All right. So I'll go with Falou Fall.
Perfect.
And it's because of the impact he made in a few games. Yes, he had a couple errors in his first couple games, but he had some real flashes of brilliance. And when I think of a U22 of the year for City this year, that's kind of what I got. I've got flashes of brilliance. We didn't have a single player of that age who had sustained success throughout the season. Song Bin came on board late in the season. Falou Fall came on around the same time. You had Joey Zielinski, who didn't do anything after the beginning of the season. Haziel Orozco had a hot spurt there for a bit. Makai Joyner, spurts again, like sub opportunities. He didn't get his first start until the final game of the season. So to me, there's no consistent U22. We didn't have a single player for City make MLS's 22 under 22. That's for sure. We had Falou Fall, who Matt Doyle, I think, said was right outside his list. So I guess I'm going to match up with that, saying Fall with the flashes of brilliance that he showed.
Jerry asked how many minutes for Fall. I was about to look that up, but I bet you have that.
Oh, I do.
334 MLS minutes. I got it right as I asked you. Sorry. So yeah, I would have said the same thing. I would have said Fall, but I will say, Safe, whoever Safe is on YouTube commenting, you've had a lot of great comments and questions today, but Safe said Song Bin almost by default, and that's how I feel about it.
I would not argue that.
Yeah. I think he's our most talented, consistently playing U22 player is a good way to phrase that. And I love that he's a U22 player because he does need to improve. I think he had a bad game this last time, but he's been our best running in behind right winger. He fits the mold. It's a player we very desperately needed. I think he has a ceiling, like a decently high ceiling. Obviously, South Korea keeps pulling him in. Like I said recently, this time it wasn't just because they were in the United States. They pulled him all the way to South Korea to play with the team. So they like him. So I hope that means that he's going to get better and better and better each year because we need his profile to score goals. That's something that Critchley mentioned in his City voice, is that we need people scoring goals from the wings, from the outside positions. He was very unspecific, which I thought was really smart of him. But Song Bin could be that guy in a couple of years, I think, or a season and a half or less. So that's what I would say. Sorry, I took too long on that one. Let's move on. Most improved player, Matt.
Yeah, inarguable on Song Bin's impact. I will say that. Most improved player from last season, I would say Klaus.
Oh, okay. Why?
Well, if I'm trying to pull his stats up really fast to talk about him, but Klaus, this season, double digit goals, for the first time since 2023. Looking at some of his stats from last season. Last season, he started, 6 less games. He played in 6 less games, and he had half as many goals. He had 5 goals, 3 assists. This year, 10 goals, 2 assists, and he had at least 1 or 2 Open Cup goals that I don't have in front of me. But his numbers, where goals per 90 was increased by a third, he just played better this season, overall. When all is said and done, he was injured a little bit in 2024. Obviously 5 goals is not anything DP caliber at all. Like at end of 2024, we're thinking we brought in reinforcements that can maybe help augment Klaus, but there was so many questions I can remember at the end of 2024 about what is Klaus's role? Why is he a designated player for us? He's coming off a 5-goal season when he played in 27 out of 34 games, and he started 23 of those, and he has 5 goals. That's not designated player material. You fast forward to this year, and he's ended with 10, 2 assists, and he, I think, has cemented himself as not just a fan favorite, but as the kind of player that we now all fully appreciate. I've seen so few criticisms of Klaus outside of your random Facebook fan group where people understand his impact to St. Louis. It is goal scoring, and he is doing that, leading the team in goal scoring. For better or for worse, the fact that it's 10, I get that, but his contributions are so much more. He's a great hold up striker. He's physical. He's good at the press. He's fast, and people don't give him credit for being fast because he looks like he's what did Twelman call him a couple years ago, like a zebra or something like that, or a horse when he's running, but it's not a deer. I think it was. He called him a deer. Yeah, and he looks like that, but he's effective. And he does everything he needs to in this system. I think this year he had a good bounce back after Olaf. Maybe he's even most improved throughout the year, not just from 24 to 25, but he's also the most improved from Olaf to the end of the year.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I would say my most improved player is Joyner, because he's come quite a long way in, maybe half a season, basically. So last year I would have said Celio, because he's become such a solid player, contributor. But this year it would be Joyner. I would say he's still a little lost out there. He has to think a lot. But what he did defensively in the first several games compared to what he did in these last 2 games he played, way better. Still not close to being perfect and good, but they're still having to cover for him. But even from the first game he played, if you get him being himself, not thinking too hard, just doing what he's good at, we see why he's going to be good. I have no doubts he's going to be good, because once he has to stop thinking so much, the more time he gets, that's when we're going to start seeing him be good, consistently, and then see spurts of great, I hope, is what we'll end up getting to there. So that's my hope, and that's my choice for most improved player. Last one. This is, I love this, Matt. Coach of the year, coach of the half decade. Can we expand it to that?
I had to throw this in there. I'm using MLS's rules because I got to vote in the MLS end of season awards. I was honored that the club allowed me to do that. But coach of the year is an award, obviously.
Awesome.
So I'm like, you know what? Let's just borrow from some of them. Let's go. They've got a young player of the year type of thing. They've got most improved, defensive MVP. We had multiple coaches. Let's just talk about it. But we talked about it earlier. It's obviously David Critchley. I mean, there, you can even argue it's John Hackworth for an organization perspective. Let's look at all the coaches in the organization, right? Hackworth led his team to the playoffs on the heels of Critchley. But no, all seriousness, David Critchley's obviously been the best St. Louis City SC coach of the year.
You mean City too when you're talking about that?
For Hackworth, yeah.
Great, yeah, Critchley, obviously. Well, here's the thing. Would we put Carnell as the best coach in the entire tenure of the club?
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. I don't care what the stats say. He won us a regular season conference.
Yeah, I suppose. Based on results.
Well, based on results, I still think Hackworth might have a better points per game overall because you count,
Mm,
1.5 years from Carnell and what happened in the middle of 2024. That was awful. But
mm,
it best coach, like, not saying the best stats-based coach, but just the best coach, I would still give it to Bradley Carnell so far because of the body of work and what he was able to do. It didn't get us a trophy, it didn't get us silverware, but I I see the Facebook memories pop up here recently of our playoff push,
yeah,
of winning the Western Conference in the regular season. Carnell gave that to us. Carnell and the
mhm,
players, but Carnell was our leader. And so I will carry the torch that of the multiple head coaches we've had, and Critchley barely counts. He's not an official head coach. We're really looking at Carnell and Olaf if you're talking about official head coaches. And in that
fair,
conversation, Carnell,
easy.
it's easy, no brainer.
Yep. Great. We're heating things up just a little bit. We're getting closer and closer to that moment. First, we're going to talk about Roman Berkey's contract. This is massive. It's most people are happy about it. I've seen some dissenting opinions,
Well,
but
and we talked about it pretty heavily on Fallout, so we probably don't need to reiterate everything. But Berkey signed a 2-year
fair.
contract with an option for 2028. It finally came to fruition. It was the negotiations that he had with Lutz Pfannenstiel were carried on by Diego. We read the quotes on Fallout. We talked about how he mentioned Diego and Roman being showed the plans, all the things that he was promised by the organization and what they're going to be building around him, and now Klaus and Dirk and all those guys. So we know that Roman is kind of bought in. But the other thing we know is Roman is bought in because Roman has apparently been paid to be bought in. Reporting from Tom Bogert and conversations really lead us all to believe Roman Berkey is a designated player who now cannot be bought down, or at least
Okay.
under the current structure of the roster rules where they have this escalating. Okay, every single year the max TAM rises a little bit, right? So like
Mm,
last year it was 650 or so thousand. This coming year will be probably around 7. It's like 1.7, and then the next year will be like 1.8. So it escalates for inflation, for cost of living, all that stuff. That's a CBA negotiated thing. So what I'm told is that at least for next year, Roman Berkey cannot be bought down as a designated player. That's where you get into the question marks of tipping the scales between the raw excitement that you, and thousands of others felt when City played that video last weekend, and they announced his signing right before the match via a video presentation. You have all that raw excitement, and then you have the reality check of what it means for our roster build. And I'll still maintain it doesn't cripple us by any sense of the imagination. We still have a U22 open, or a DP slot open. We still have flexibility. So without getting ahead of ourselves into who's deciding what to do with those roster designations, this doesn't cripple us. It will not help us in the optics, and we're going to get hammered for it. And when it comes to preseason previews
mhm.
next season, there are going to be multiple conversations from national authors, national writers who hammer St. Louis for taking a goalkeeper making max TAM, who was a DP, then he was a TAM player, and re-signing him to a new contract for, I believe, his age 35 season as a full-fledged designated player who cannot be bought down. That's that's going to happen. Prep yourself for all of that. That's the negative side. The positive is obviously Berkey is the biggest fan favorite of any City player. He's been our captain for 3 years. He's arguably the heart and soul of this team. He's the leader through everything. And so this signifies stability in addition to a known commodity that you hope this year was an aberration when it comes to Berkey stats because they were significantly lower than the first two. And so you hope for that bounce back to get to what his form was in 23 especially, but also 24.
Yep, and we're gonna need him, and I think for stability, that is the biggest thing. Is I'm excited for that. Would have been, I think, unfortunate. Let's say Critchley continues with the team, we do put that line in the sand, and we start building and building and building into something better instead of going backward. Keeping Critchley on would be fine with me, and I do think Roman Berkey staying on is going to keep things consistent as well in the same exact kind of way. So, imagine him leaving, and not only are we trying to build out, make this roster better with the 11 field players and a couple backups, whatever the TAM and 2 DPs at that point. Sorry, 1 DP and another possible DP or U22, would we, in some ways, keeping it stable for 2 more years? If it goes well, use that option. If it doesn't go well, if we find ourselves really needing that money to be spent on a goal scorer or some other position, then you don't give them that option. And we move on in 2 years when the rest of our roster is hopefully solid after the rest of our roster has been built up, made better and better and better. Those both the years of growing and getting better instead of moving backwards. So I just view it all encompassing at this point as the players that are staying, including Berkey, maybe including Critchley, maybe including Hackworth in the front office. We got to keep things stable and get better every year. So that's what I have to say about that. And Matt is rejoining us as I finished my comment. Matt, that was really good timing. Basically, keeping things stable, I think it's a good thing. Even if, in 2 years we feel like we've lost, we've done badly and it hasn't been a good deal, we don't fire that option. We use that money to get better. But that's still 2 years where we've had Berkey and improved instead of going backwards. We've kept things consistent. And I think 2 years, I think this next year is going to be very much a rebuilding year. But hopefully the year after that, we're good, right? And if Berkey doesn't get us across the line, we can get someone else to get us across the line maybe the following year. Or if we look good in 2 years, we want him again for the third year, that's fine with me too. I'm all good with this one.
I think that's a pretty good segue into our next topic of conversation and the heart and soul of this episode, as we're well into it, but we've recapped 2025 enough. I think it's time to talk about the big news that's happened this week, which is just mere days after the 2025 season ended for St. Louis City. Player options were announced on Tuesday, October 21st, in a move that shocked many, many, many St. Louis City fans. City announced that they were entering the next chapter of its MLS journey by announcing that the club currently now has 22 players under contract for 2026. Those players include the options that City exercised on Chris Durkin, Songbin Jong, Klaus, Brendan McSorley, Christian Oliveras, Jaziel Orozco, and Miguel Perez. The club announced on Tuesday they declined the 2026 contract options for defenders Henry Kessler, Michael Wenzel, and Josh Yarrow, midfielders Rasmus Alm, Alfredo Morales, and Akil Watts. They noted that defenders Henry Kessler and Josh Yarrow had their options declined, but are currently in conversations with the club on a potential return. Now, if you follow me on social media, you will also remember that my beloved defender of the past, Jake Nerwinski, was also in conversations at one point to return to the club, and we know how that worked out. So just because you read that a player is in conversations, that does not mean that things are guaranteed to happen. So temper expectations for especially one Henry Kessler. And Jerry Hayes, I know what Henry means to you. I know what Henry means to a lot of folks. Henry Kessler is not just a great guy. He was my defensive player of the year. I hope we re-sign him. The problem with Henry Kessler right now, as I understand it, is his option. Options don't necessarily translate to the same salary, right? It's Klaus may, and we understand Klaus will be a TAM player in 2026, so that's great. But with Henry Kessler, we absorbed his contract from New England. When we traded Tim Parker for Henry Kessler and all the cash considerations, the GAM, we absorbed Henry Kessler's contract that he had negotiated with New England. So don't get mad at City. You can get mad at him for a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about here in a minute, but don't get mad at City for Henry Kessler's option being an escalator from what his contract was last season at $1.33 million. That's New England's fault. And so that City is trying to negotiate to bring Henry Kessler back. We'll see if that works. But other players to note are that Ben Lunt is out of contract. He is eligible for MLS free agency, but the club noted he's also in discussions for a potential return next season. They do note that one-time player who had all kinds of expectations for City, Selmer Pedro, has had his contract expire with the club. And that's kind of all they said. So we wish you the best in your future endeavors, Selmer Pedro. Discussions are still ongoing regarding the contract options for Joey Zielinski, Jay Reed, and Seth Antwi. Conrad Vollum and Devin Padelford have had their loan agreements expire or will expire December 31st. but the club is in conversations with their parent clubs, so Slavia Prague for Conrad Balam and Minnesota United for Devin Padelford, about potential returns. So we're in discussions, at least. We're attempting to see if we can purchase them. That's interesting. The city does want to do that. But with all that said, I'm going to show, if you're on our live stream, we're going to look at see what the city roster looks like with all these players under contract. We have 14 senior roster players. We have 7 supplemental roster players, plus Jake Girdwood Reich, who's on loan. So 22 total players. Phil, I don't know if you want to circle back and have any thoughts on these players, but the other noteworthy thing that we're going to have to address in a moment is the fact that these decisions were made right now without a sporting director in place.
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, I think the general consensus out of everyone I've talked to is everyone's a little bit confused that Yarrow might come back because he's already on league minimum. So what is there to talk about? I'm not sure his talent needs a raise. You know what I mean? So love him. I'm sorry. I don't like to say negative things and I don't even know how to lighten that, but I just think it's the hard truth. But all the rest that have been kind of dropped, it feels about right. Matt just ditto what he said on Kessler. I'd love to see him come back for less money based on his health situations alone. And I would prefer he come back and for less money. I think that would be a really good deal for City and hopefully for Kessler as well. Vollum and Padelford would love to see them come back. I think the only other weird one that everyone's talking about is Durkin gets a big raise this year because he's not on the U22 contract anymore. And so a lot of people are like, well, is that worth it anymore? And so I understand that feeling. I'm fine with it. And I think my hope, I was talking to someone today, is that Durkin will kind of be that guy next to Leuven as a 1A, but maybe we find someone younger who's going to push him that is so good that he's like a 1B to Durkin, not like a lot worse, but like pretty much as good as Durkin and younger, that they can push each other, fill in for each other when they're hurt. That's my dream situation. I don't know if the money is there, if they'd have to be Tam or whatever, but that's the dream situation without talking too much about
money. And to be fair, Durkin is still going to make the same amount of money. He's still going to make, and I'm sharing the screen. So he's still going to make like 525,000. The problem with Durkin is what his salary cap hit is going to be. He drops the U22 designation. So you're right that his salary is the problem, though, in that that's the only reason I think a lot of people were tepid on Durkin being brought back is it worth it to have your cap hit go from 200,000 as a U22 up to the actual salary 525,000 and fit that in. Now, if you
and let's say this real quick too, is like, we'll hit on this again probably, but Matt and I kind of agree, like we are actually, these decisions in a vacuum, despite what we're about to talk about, I think we're basically like good.
Agreed.
Nothing idiotic here. So that's the main point here.
That is absolutely the main point. And we're happy with Klaus. We talked about him. He was my most improved player. I'm happy with Durkin even at that salary. I don't really have a problem with that because he's like the 9th or 10th at the moment, having 22 players on the roster with 7 of them being supplemental roster players making $100,000 or less. Durkin is like the 9th or 10th highest paid player. So he's not a TAM level player by any means. He's going to be about 200,000 or 300,000 short of TAM range. It's not bad. Durkin is the quality player we need, but the better scenario is to use some of that, like you said, TAM money and buy a 6, find a 6. It's a difficult position to search for. It's a difficult position to find because they don't exist. They don't grow on trees. You can't just go to a free agency and find a quality 6. It's hard, right? For a tried and true 6 that can stay deep, stay in front of the back line, sweep across the field and clean things up that would unlock your Eddie Leuven or your Chris Durkin kind of player. You find that 6, suddenly Chris Durkin becomes, like you said, a 1A, 1B to Edu Leuven. He becomes a super sub. Our midfield becomes extremely strong if you can find a 6 to complement Leuven and Durkin. And that helps with the fact that we've declined the option on Alfredo Morales, who Morales is old, right? So that's the obvious bit. As good as Morales had been, he's going to be, approaching, I think it's like what, age 35 season, something like that, mid 30s at least, near Roman Berkey. And that's a lot of mileage. So yeah, all that said, Klaus, McSorley, Oliveras, Orozco, Perez, Songbin, zero concern. Songbin was my no-brainer, in fact. And then Chris Durkin, I don't even have a problem with how we're bringing him back. because we have a boatload of GAM to work with to do all this other stuff. Now, as far as the players we declined, the only one that I really am kind of bummed about is Michael Wenzel. We talked about Henry Kessler, so that one's kind of a
Thank you.
no-brainer. Like Kessler, we want to bring
Yeah.
back. He was my defensive player of the year. We can't cripple ourselves in making Kessler a DP or something crazy like that. But Michael Wenzel, I feel he is similar to what Jay Reed, what Seth Antwi might end up being, what Johnny Klein was last year. I feel Michael Wenzel might be trapped in that we gave him a contract because we were desperate. At the time in 2024, we needed a center back to play. We needed depth. We used up short-term loans and we signed him, but he never really got a good run. He had very little minutes this year, just never really felt like he was given the big opportunity, and now he's gone. Right. So that is extremely well, he's gone as far as we know. He could always be re-signed to a new City 2 contract. That's a thing where just because City gets rid of him, you could bring him back on that type of a deal and then restart everything, sort of. But ultimately, that's the one I'm disappointed at because of the promise that Wenzel showed. He was our captain for City 2. Don't forget that. And he never really had the opportunity for City. Even is a big squad rotation kind of guy. Kyle Hebert was always in front of him. JGR saw time in front of him alongside him. But the other ones, Josh Yarrow is a great leader. He's a perfect locker room guy. He's not the caliber of player that I want on the field. And I think that's a perfect summation, in my opinion. Rasmus Alm, we know the injury history. No concerns there. Alfredo Morales, I mentioned the age issue. Akil Watts, I don't have an issue with that. He served our club extremely well. And honestly, the one thing I do have to say to some of these guys, especially Rasmus Alm and Akil Watts, they're OGs. Akil Watts is the OG of the OG, where he's been with City 2 since 2022. He deserves his flowers for being with this club, coming along as far as he did, helping us as much as he did in all these pinches, playing multiple positions. Akil Watts was serviceable. He wasn't good. He wasn't great, serviceable in what he did, but he helped the team out so much. He was a servant of the club. And Rasmus Alm, the same. Rasmus Alm just got done coaching some City Future stuff while he was injured and put on season-ending injury. Class act, loved the community, just like Joachim Nilsson did. Their kids were in Veta. I mean, these guys cemented themselves over the years. And so it's going, as Diego calls this the next chapter, or City calls it the next chapter, it's going to be tough to really say goodbye to some of these guys, even if we're not talking about their on-field performance, just having these guys be part of the club.
Yep. And I just want to, agree with you on Wenzel. I felt the same thing about him as I did about JGR, which is like, they didn't much for the senior team. So, and granted, we didn't see enough to know, right? And I think we have to trust multiple people's judgment, right? Because it happened with multiple coaches that they didn't get a whole lot of time with the senior team, but we never saw them mess up very badly with the senior team. And I just always thought they should have gotten more chances. So, and again, JGR too could be the answer to this, that maybe we have more invested in JGR. They're similar players, similar position. They got to keep one or the other. Maybe they had to make a hard decision. So
you ready to
but
move
that
on
leads
to the
us
next?
To the big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That leads us to the big one. So like there hasn't been a sporting director announced. John Hackworth is the temporary sporting director, right? Has he been announced as such?
John Hackworth is the technical director, and as it was said this summer, John Hackworth and Diego Gigliani are sharing sporting director duties at the moment.
Oh, okay. So I missed that announcement. So it is official.
It wasn't announced. It was something Diego said at his little training press conference that he had, where he talked about what their duties will be. But at the time, Diego, and I posted this on social media, so please go check that video out if you haven't on my feed. Diego said that he knows what his experience is. He knows the line on the technical side, and he's not going to overstep that line. So the presumption would be John Hackworth and staff making the calls on scouting, player options, player contracts, player development, the signings that occurred after Lutz left. I think at least Brendan McSorley, Seth Antwi, I think those were the two signings that occurred after Lutz left. That was supposedly driven by Hack. And that will go into this conversation. Is there's a lot that we don't know about this entire scenario, but some of the reporting is going to be very important. There's two schools of thought that inform what happened this week. The fact that St. Louis City made these player announcements. One of them, and some of the facts, let's get some of the facts out of the way. Player options are not due at this time. You do not, the roster rules say that the offseason calendar says that player options have to be announced and turned into the club by November 26th. That is what the offseason calendar says for Major League Soccer. And there are considerations if you make it further into the playoffs for later dates to make those choices. But as of this recording on Wednesday, only about 3 teams have made their roster announcements. So we did not have to do this at this time. When asked what the purpose was for making these roster announcements, the club told me that the team has postseason training next week, meaning next week. And to do that, you have to execute player options. Now, I had multiple follow-up questions to the club. What is the purpose of this postseason training? Does the postseason training have an importance related to hiring a sporting director, head coach, or would they not hold a postseason training so you can wait for a sporting director to be hired and then help make these roster decisions? I didn't get any answers on those. So I didn't get answers yet to the follow-ups. I hope to at some point when we have a chance to speak to Diego Gigliani or John Hackworth or whatever that ends up being. The club has also not held a postseason press conference. So there are similarities to last season in the sense that last season, the club also made their roster decisions immediately following the season, but you had continuity of sporting director at that point. The continuity of decision maker wasn't a concern that we did this last year. You have a rumored from Justin Horniker had said that by the end of October, the club hopes to be able to make that signing for sporting director. I noted Marcel Hartl had said they have this training. The other interesting piece of this whole training thing is you're getting folks on the national media side and other clubs. This doesn't seem to be a known thing, this postseason training where you have to make these roster decisions. Taylor Twellman even responded to a couple tweets, and he was kind of miffed by the same thing. He threw a different kind of date range out there talking about you don't have to make these decisions before Halloween. And I think that was just like, this is October. So talking about that time frame, like basically you didn't need to do this right now. And I talked to a handful at this point of other teams across Major League Soccer, the media that cover these other teams, and they have been in the league for years. And I asked them all, has any team had a postseason training that has required you to make roster decisions, or you've made roster decisions because of this postseason training? 0 out of the 7 teams that I've contacted have the media in those areas have said that this is a thing. So there's so much ambiguity on what the purpose of this postseason training is. Is it to impress a potential sporting director coming on board? Is it just to be a deload process in helping players get to the offseason? But there's so much unknown and really skepticism going on. Taylor Twellman voiced it about.
And a lack of communication from the club. We'll just say that. Like, they could have cleared this up pretty quickly, right? But
they could have,
but there's been no communication about exactly what's going on.
And that's the most frustrating thing. Like I tweeted it out on Wednesday. I said it's not the decisions that were made, because I think we talked about it earlier, Phil. We're behind that. We're okay with the decisions that were made. It's the lack of transparency on why you would really make these decisions now without having a sporting director in place. Because there's 2 schools of thought. There's, okay, they make sense, so why does it matter what the timing was? We're fans. It makes sense to us because we've seen what St. Louis has been. You're looking at hiring a sporting director that you hope is going to be in charge of molding this club for years to come under whatever they feel is best for the strategy, best for the tactics, the formation, all of those things. But you don't have that person in place. So we're talking about retroactively saying it makes sense to bring back Klaus, Durkin, Songbin, Miguel Perez, all these other players. We're not the roster builders. We're not the ones who are going to be tasked to say, all right, now you've got 22 players instead of 15. You're going to have to build your roster around Brendan McSorley. You're going to have your third keeper or second keeper potentially be Christian Oliveras. Jaziel Orozco is on your roster. Miguel Perez is a homegrown who's still here. And if you don't like them because of what you've seen them do, tough cookies. Like, we brought them back. You're going to have to deal with them for another year. That's what you're doing to your potential sporting director. So the path that this leads us down at this point in time is kind of a really scary path on the potentiality of what it means for the next steps for St. Louis. And honestly, Phil, like, just stream of consciousness here, I see two possibilities on why this would make sense. One is John Hackworth is getting the sporting director job.
Yeah.
You let him make these decisions. And I even said maybe a month from now, all of this is like, we have 2020 vision. We understand what happened in the reasons in the weeks past. Okay. A month from now, it could all make sense. We might not like how it makes sense, but it could make sense. And the way that it would make sense is if John Hackworth becomes sporting director. The other frustrating thing about this is Tom Bogert's tweet. I think this is where a lot of alarm bells go off in a lot of people's minds. I mentioned earlier how Diego told us this summer that he admits he is not a technical guy, doesn't go down that track, doesn't have that experience, which we'll talk about in a second. But he relies on others to make those decisions. The coaches, the sideline folks, the sporting folks. Tom Bogert tweeted out when he was reporting on the player options that City announced the first round of contract updates, but he goes on to say, most interesting, the timing of doing this before naming a GM, which is sporting director. You get the titles mixed up. Timing before doing this, before naming a sporting director, and points to what I've heard from sources around MLS. Club president Diego Gigliani likely will have more impact on sporting decisions. And this is alarming for the reasons that we just said. And it marks a seismic shift potentially in what his hands-on role will be. But I do want to level set real quick what his role has been and what we understand his role to be. We talked about this in the DMs, Phil, so I'm going to be bringing some of that out, that Diego Gigliani was hired to be the president of the entire organization. President/GM is his official title. He absorbed that from Carolyn Kindle, who Carolyn Kindle is still the CEO of this organization. There's kind of like a board of sorts where the Taylor family are the owners. They're the ones who have the purse strings by and large. But Carolyn Kindle is the CEO. She's at the very top of the organization. But Diego, as president and GM, is the decision maker. The buck stops basically with him on the day-to-day, on the strategic approach that he runs by Carolyn in that organizational makeup. And that includes the sporting department. This was a question when he was first hired back in 2023 of how are him and Lutz going to get along. And whether you think that was always been a rosy relationship or not, which is hard to believe given the unceremonious way that Lutz was let go, Diego does sign off on all of these sporting moves. He signs off on the checks. He signs off. He asks the questions at the very least. So there has always been some involvement in the sense of, yeah, let's move forward with that. Okay. Lutz is a sporting director, brings things to Diego and says, this is what I want to do. This is how much money I need. This is what I want to get. And we hope that in that dynamic, the sporting director, the one who has the experience, the knowledge, and the wherewithal to run a sporting department of a professional soccer club, all that experience, we hope that that person is basically given autonomy and saying, you're in this spot because we trust you to make these decisions, and you're the one, this role is the one that makes these decisions. So with that removed now,
and it makes sense in that we have Hack and Lutz working together, talking to each other, and that's a nice little combination there, kind of checking each other. But also with Diego above Lutz, that means we have a separation of duties in order to check and balance that. If one guy is way off, hopefully Diego can catch that and say, no, go back to the drawing board, come up with a new idea, and then come back to me with idea. Or if you're really dead set, come back with more evidence and prove that you were right all along. And I'll say, okay. So, Lutz doesn't get to just get whoever he wants. Someone has to approve it or say no or sign off on it, whatever.
Right.
So that's a nice check and balance. That's the way most companies are built and most clubs are built, and the way it should be, in my opinion.
It is. I think and Jerry and Aaron in the chat have good points that transparency isn't due fans immediately. Club doesn't have an obligation to immediately put everything on the field and say, we are this close to having a sporting director. We have one in the building. This is why we're making this choice before sporting director. They could even possibly be saying we didn't want to give a sporting director a team that has 15 contracted players. We didn't want to overload a sporting director. That could be the other side of this. To be fair, I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I'm trying to think of every possibility here, but that could be another option, is that Hackworth made the call with the other team that said, we know what the identity of the club is going to be. Like, we know what we want. We know that we want a sporting director to continue this kind of organizational philosophy. And we think these players embody that. And we think we think this new sporting director will be best served by having 22 contracted players as opposed to 15 that include Durkin, Songbin, Klaus, McSorley, Oliveras, Orozco, and Perez. That could be a very possible scenario, that part of the sporting director search is that they want to give them this roster, right? They don't want to give them half of a roster.
And it could be a line in the ground saying, we're not going to get another Olaf, right? Like, he will do our style and he will use these players for that style, that kind of thing. I want to also say that Santiago had the idea, and he's sticking to it pretty strongly. So I want to make sure he was represented here, that, maybe Hack is going to be the sporting director, but he's also still in the middle of a City 2 season.
Yep.
So it's possible they just didn't want any weird questions, weird assumptions, and they just want to be polite and wait till that's over and then focus on the sporting director at that point. So just to throw that in there as well while we're on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very valid point, which just lends more to the fact of Hack might be getting this job. And if he does get this job, there would presumably be a technical director spot open. Fettler Colton in the chat mentions it. And I think this offers a possibility into the future window where you have a sporting director like Hackworth. You have a technical director who might come in. Maybe he has a different worldview than Hackworth, because Diego did talk about having different opinions, different viewpoints, different experiences, cultures, and everything in the front office room. And so if you have Hack as a sporting director, we'll have that conversation, but a technical director could be hired under him with a different experience. And then I still think Critchley is the front runner for the head coach. So you have stability and continuity, for better or for worse. A lot of it goes back to, if you're going to have this kind of stability, if you're going to have Hack as a sporting director, Critchley as a head coach, why'd you get rid of Lutz? Hackworth was under Lutz, worked with Lutz for all these years, for multiple years. They were buddies on this. They put this roster together for the get-go. You're bringing back a lot of the same guys. So if you're talking about trying to find a reason from looking at the roster or roster build, competitive, the performance, the form, I struggle with finding a really good explanation on why Lutz was let go, other than something we just didn't hear about, is never going to be something public. The way that it was announced, and you just didn't hear from Lutz for like a week or two before that social media post. It was bizarre at the time. I still maintain it was bizarre. And these breadcrumbs, especially if Hackworth gets the sporting director job, if they ever mention stability in the club, I just, something had to have been up, because it doesn't make sense to get rid of Lutz and then basically keep par for the course.
I like it. Jerry Hayes says Lutz comes back. That's the announcement. I would actually be fine with that. And I think this is where we focus on Gigliani as having sporting decisions, sporting power, technical decision power.
Yep.
I think this is highly abnormal with even NFL, MLB. You know what I mean? Like, should the CEO, the president, have the power to choose a player? Because my big question is, what is the check and balance on that? Let's say Diego says, I want to make this decision. The only people who can question him are his people who he's the boss of, right? And so that doesn't create this environment of we all have to check each other. It's just, to me, the CEO or president should just be signing off on things, saying yes or no, come back with better. And it should be the technical staff that is making absolute decisions. When we start putting the highest man on the totem pole on important decisions like technical, like bringing in players, signing options, who's going to hold that person accountable? Do we think that Carolyn Kindle or the ownership group is going to come up to Diego and say, this option, you shouldn't have, that was a bad option, or this has been proven that it was a bad option. And then is he just fired at that point? Or, are these people going to look at Diego's weekly decisions and be like, was that a good decision? Maybe you shouldn't have done that. Did you check with me before that? There's just no check on Diego if he's in charge of technical decisions. And I think that's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. Executive powers, even to a president. Terrible idea. You know what I'm saying? Of the United States. And I think it works for this. And I think that's part of even what Aaron was saying, that, they don't own the fans anything. And I think that's true to some extent. But this club hasn't been successful in a lot of its front office technical decisions. And we are important to them. We aren't owed information, but with their history being so bad and something very abnormal like this pops up and they continue to hide it and keep it in the dark as much as possible instead of just coming out and saying what's going on, how does that make a beaten down fan base want to buy in and get excited about the decisions that are being made? We don't even have a sporting director, and these things are being made. And you don't think we should be told what's going on? People who have seen bad management decisions. Was Lutz, was done in the dark. We don't know whether that was a good decision or not. And we're just supposed to be trusting these people to do the right thing. And to me, that's tough. And I think we should look at Diego's experience. Part of the reason he said he shouldn't be dipping into that is his life experience. I'm on his LinkedIn page. He's has started his job as an international sports sponsorship assistant, had to do with FIFA World Cup. Really cool position. No technical experience on that job other than dealing with FIFA on a marketing level, right? Analyst for a consulting for management consulting firm. That one's pretty generic. Diamond Cluster International had to do with a merger of Diamond Technology partner. It's just a regular business merger. Summer associate, investment banking, having to do with a buyout team. A manager for management consulting, associate partner for communications, media, and technology. Really cool stuff. Director, that led straight into director of marketing, media, and fan development at Manchester City. Yes, that's a soccer team, but there is no technical decision going on now. Like, yeah, he's watching the game closely. He gets to talk to people at a very high level. He's watching these games on the weekend from his armchair. But does that mean he's qualified to be making technical decisions? Independent board member of Inter Milan, has nothing to do with technical decisions. So we're talking zero technical leadership experience. And he's now, no one's asking any questions about him. Tom Bogert's reporting from sources. This isn't just him saying he's hearing, like he has actual sources saying that Giglion is making technical decisions. He should make zero technical decisions based on his experience, including his experience at St. Louis City, in my opinion. So this is unacceptable. And the fact that maybe this is being hidden, and perhaps that he's not being watched closely and that he's just allowed to make these decisions without any pushback is extremely worrisome to me. Matt, please tie this together and finish it off, put a bow on it. And I want to hear what you think about all of it.
Yeah. The specific word, it's not just Tom Bogert. Taylor Twellman mentioned it's things. Joe Lowry from Backheeled and Total Soccer Show. Why on earth would you make these decisions before hiring a CSO, Chief Sporting Officer? The presumption from everyone who knows Diego's background is that Diego's not qualified to be this person. He shouldn't be diving that far in. You can't just use St. Louis City as your plaything and say, I want to bring in these kinds of players when you aren't experienced at that level. I remember people being frustrated by Lutz at times with his hire, pointing back to his lack of an extensive history in running a club as a sporting director. I think he'd only been sporting director or CSO at one other club. It might have been Dusseldorf, but he was a scout before that. And so there was even conversations when we were struggling at times that Lutz didn't have
Mm.
the lengthy experience that we wanted or needed in a sporting director. And he had been an actual sporting director for a Bundesliga club before that. So to now come on board and say Tom Bogert saying that Diego likely will have more impact on sporting decisions, that opens the door to what that means. First of all, it could mean that he will be asking more questions. It could be he's networking more. He's talking to other MLS clubs himself as opposed to John Hackworth making those conversations, but involving himself more and more as a boots on the ground type sporting director is not going to be good for this club. I told Matt Doyle this weekend. Thank you, Doyle, for referencing me in your article. But I think that fans will continue to revolt, will continue to be frustrated, will continue to ask questions, continue to wonder the longer this goes out about who's making the decisions at the top and why is Diego getting more and more notoriety from these national media, the national media when it comes to Major League Soccer in stepping into the sporting side. Tom Bogert isn't just an ESPN person. He isn't just a writer for who covers MLS part-time. Tom Bogert is the MLS writer. If Tom Bogert says something, he is hearing factual things. He is hearing legitimate conversations from other MLS teams that Diego is doing something to have more say. He's inserting himself more. And maybe it's a temporary thing, right? There's an optimistic way to view this, is that they are still looking for a sporting director and he's doing what he has to do because there's nobody else to do it. John Hackworth is still coaching City 2. John Hackworth has a bunch of other responsibilities. Somebody's got to be doing some kind of work around the league to have conversations and do things. Diego is a co-sporting director. So like, I do have all these concerns. I would be frustrated with Diego overstepping his bounds, but there is a part of me that does come back and tries to put both feet on the ground and say, there is a logical explanation for this. And my logical explanation points back to John Hackworth's multiple duties that he has. The time he's spending as City 2 head coach precludes him maybe from being as involved in the networking, in the conversations with other teams. So the only other guy in the room right now is Diego, right? So the only other person available to have those conversations. And so maybe he is having more of an impact at the moment on sporting decisions. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to have that big of an impact going forward. The big concern here for me is that he dips his toes into the sporting side. He has these conversations and maybe he wants to stay there, right? Maybe he wants to stay there. And what that means for the future of when they do hire or place somebody in the sporting director role, that Diego is going to want to just move the line a little bit, stay entrenched, mention a few more things, have a few more happy hours with some MLS counterparts and be a little bit more boots on the ground. He likes how this is going. He thinks he's got good ideas. He wants to stay in that role. That's not good for when you hire a sporting director to have that micromanaging of a GM on the sporting side. You still need to have that delineation of duties, and that would be where it would be bad. But there is still, I would say, reason to be optimistic, even given some of these reports on just the state of the club right now. But then I pivot into, it's October 22nd. We're winding down this week after the last game of the season. October is getting away from us. We've already made these player announcements, and you're hearing more and more chatter about is it becoming more difficult for St. Louis to find a sporting director? How close are they to finding a sporting director? And that's where the conversation starts to get worrisome. To me, it's not necessary. Yes, the Diego thing is worrisome in what we're hearing, but I can talk myself into there is a plausible explanation for this. What gets more worrisome is the fact that we still don't have, and I might not be right. I might be way too rose color glasses on these. I may be trying to talk myself into not going over the ledge. Totally understand that. You could be totally right on all this. And even this whole week, I've been the one asking the questions too,
Yeah.
of this doesn't seem right. There are pieces that aren't adding up. There's things that we don't know, and what we're seeing doesn't make sense with the long-term vision. All that's still true. But what is really worrisome is as we go longer and longer without signing a sporting director, Diego will continue to be more and more involved in the sporting department by default almost. So there's a lot that will need to be unpacked when it comes to what we're able to ask, when that new sporting director is announced and hired, and when we do end up having a press conference about these delineation of duties, about what was your role in the player options picked up? Why did you choose to do that? What is the MLS rule surrounding that? I hope to get a lot of those answers. We are very much in this nebulous time of, and it reminds me of times before where certain things have happened, certain decisions have been made, lack of decisions have been made, no signings in a transfer window have occurred until the very end, for instance, or something. And it's St. Louis City has never been that club that is just so transparent about every single thing going on. Having like comments from certain front office folks about certain decisions. The closest we get is the fact that it was Diego making the comments in the press release about Roman Berkey. So we know, and Berkey mentioned Diego. We know that piece. When it comes to the roster decisions that were made, the only quotes in here come from John Hackworth and Diego Gigliotti both had quotes in this. So they shared kind of responsibility for thanking the players, preparing for 26. There is a modicum, I think, of fans reading into this because of the Tom Bogert reporting and the lack of specificity on who's doing what, along with Hackworth's role with City 2, which leads us to think Diego, just like I said, by default would be taking more of a role. This whole nebulous time, this whole lack of clarity, this whole uncertainty is why it's frustrating for fans. Not that we're owed things, not that we deserve to know every step of the way who's making the decisions, but I think a re-emphasis, a reinforcement that we haven't changed anything. We're we're still in the process of doing all of this. I think the lack of the assumption from the front office is frustrating in the sense that it's been months since Lutz has been let go. It's been even more months since Olaf's been let go. And you're riding into an offseason where you've made the thing, you've announced the thing that everybody's waiting on to happen after the sporting director. So by doing that early, at the very least, I wish the front office would explain that move on why it needed to be made now. And I love the PR department for St. Louis City. They're great to us. They offer not just us, but other podcasters, other writers, no matter big or small, from Tom Timmerman down to high school writers who are still in. They offer access to everyone, right? So they do great, but they scrape for information sometimes, I feel, to give us the answers that we want. And it's up to, I would say, the front office in the sporting department. It's up to the VPs, the president and GM, to understand what additional information would help just provide clarity into what's going on in this front office.
Yep. And so, sorry, but there's two columns too that I just want to like kind of specify too, because you kind of gave possibilities of why this isn't a big deal. And I just want to make two columns. Like, one is there are several possibilities here that are actually fine. And one of them being like Hackworth is the sporting director. He's made most of these decisions. Maybe Diego just signed off on it. That's fine. That's 100% fine.
That would explain why do the player options now.
Right. There's a lot of things that make that work. And I think in this column, there are a bunch of like gray area from that perfect scenario that's fine, a little bit grayer and a gradient of gray of things are okay. And so I'm seeing these wonderful comments in the chat. I wish I could read them all, but there are a lot of possibilities here. Many of them are getting hit on in the chat, and there's a million more on top of what we've said and what the chat has said. There is a column over here that I want to just like say, like, there's a small, tiny possibility of things that aren't okay. And that's if Diego is making technical decisions on the regular with Hackworth. And if it's a 50-50 split, that worries me a lot. In my opinion, it's inappropriate in general for that to happen. I've laid out why. And I think we should draw a line as fans. We're not owed information by any means. Aaron kind of corrected me. He's like, I didn't say it wasn't dangerous. You're right. That's what I meant to say, is we're not owed anything. But I do think it's dangerous to leave fans in the dark when things have gone badly, right? And if there's this rumor about Diego making technical decisions on the regular, this needs to be addressed. Okay. So you can leave us in the dark and we can continue to freak out like I am right now and worry about Diego making way too many decisions and having no oversight on the regular, because that's not acceptable at any club. Here and there, get my guy. It happens. What Jerry, who's the Cowboys guy, Jerry Jones, right, does all kinds of terrible things. And they work around it. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it's not. It's disgusting. I don't want to see that in my club in St. Louis. We're St. Louisans. We're Midwesterners. We play by the book, okay? And we work hard and we make whatever work. We don't let some guy come in from Manchester City with nothing but marketing and business information, like business experience, come in and start telling us what players we should and should not sign. That's not something we do, okay? And I'm drawing a line in the sand saying that's not okay. I'm not even okay with him filling in, as Matt maybe laid out as being okay. That's just me. Maybe I'm being too picky, but I'm not even okay with him filling in. You give Hack more power and maybe you elevate someone else to come up with more ideas. Bring in an outside contractor. You give a couple ideas, but you do not infer or say, these are the option guys that I think we're going to go with. And then expect Hack to either sign off on them or agree with you or fight with you. Like, Diego should not be in that position, period. End of statement, ever. And I think he needs to be removed from that from above, in my opinion, or he needs to put someone above him that will check on him every day. If he wants technical jobs, fine. He needs someone above him to be his boss. I think he needs to choose between the two. And if he was put in a position where there was this vacuum of power in the technical office that needed to be filled, and I think someone I would admire would look at that vacuum and say, that is tempting. I've always wanted to have technical decisions, but that's not my experience. That's not my job. I'm going to help everyone else who has technical experience in this organization create a committee, whatever, fill that role in the best way possible with people who are experienced in doing that, and delegate it, be selfless, and continue doing your job above that in a way that was outlined when you got the job, that was outlined for you in your continuing of your job once Carolyn Kindle left that position, right? So I think if it was someone I admired in that position, vacuum of power, they leave it alone. They don't touch it. They don't get sticky fingers. They leave it alone. And I think there's a chance that Diego has failed his test on the hill, as it were, from the devil, if you want to kind of put it that way, because it's scary. It would be hard for every man to say no to that possibility. But I wish he would stay out, and I think he needs to stay out. And if the club has allowed it, that's needs to be addressed. It needs to never happen again. And we as fans need to make a stand about this and freak out until the club either clarifies that that's not what happened, or maybe even clarifies that that will never happen in the future. I think we've gotten to the point where we need to clarify it to that extent, because their darkness makes this scary.
So here's the other problem that we're now in. You mentioned that Hackworth getting the sporting director job would make, I said this too, makes a lot of this make sense. And it would be an explanation for what's going on, right? But would it? Would that, because now we're in a scenario where we're getting reports and rumors that Diego is stepping into wanting to have more of an active role in the sporting side, and it's Diego and Hackworth sharing responsibilities right now. So do you really think that the rumors, the speculation would quell if John Hackworth were installed as the sporting director? And I use that word very intentionally because now you're running the risk of taking this scenario right now of Diego and Hack sharing duties, and you're making it permanent. Like that's what it is. You're installing this as your regime. And if Diego's stepping into the sporting side in any capacity to the level of Tom Bogert's reporting, then what would give us the confidence that it's actually John Hackworth making the decisions and doing the scouting, recruiting, whatever a sporting director is responsible for, as opposed to a true co-chief sporting officer type role between the two? I think you've introduced that ambiguity now, and it's almost Pandora's box is sort of getting opened here. So to me,
Yep.
John Hackworth getting the sporting director job does not solve the problem.
Right. The
Now,
darkness makes us wonder if he will always have these technical
yes,
decisions, even when we're not being told that, right?
yes,
Because of the lack of transparency from the communications.
and it's really frustrating because like John Hackworth in and of himself, I think would make an okay sporting director. He doesn't have the body of work that would say, okay, front office experience, but he's got the network, he's got the contacts, he's got the respect. I think John Hackworth would make a good sporting director. I'm okay saying that. At least I would be willing to give him a shot.
Same.
But as what's transpired recently with the reports, with the decisions being made now, with no sporting director installed, if Tom Bogert hadn't tweeted out what he tweeted out and Matt Doyle hadn't poked what he poked on Blue Sky, those guys are plugged in. I give credence. I give a credibility to what they say, what they ask, and what they put out into the world. The fact that they've introduced this as a scenario really dampens my excitement for a John Hackworth promotion to sporting director because of what that could mean for who's actually pulling the strings here. And again, we're never going to have the answers of, okay, this one has Diego's fingerprints. This one has Hackworth's. We never had that for Diego and Lutz as well. And there, from everything I know, I don't have reason to believe it was one big happy family. I mentioned how it ended, and that's reason enough to believe that something had been going on. And then you fast forward to now, and it's just too much has transpired and been reported and is being talked about by those in the know in MLS circles that I don't know if I'm any longer comfortable with John Hackworth getting this job because of what that would mean for who's actually making decisions. And that really stinks for my perception of John Hackworth being in that role. If I'm proven wrong, if I talk to John Hackworth and he says, Matt, you're way off base. Like I get why you're saying what you're saying, but it's not true. That's pretty much the only reason that I would step down from this thought or worry, because I trust Hackworth to be point blank and honest. I hope to, if he does get this job, I hope to have that conversation to find that answer out and hear it directly from him, because that's kind of the only way I'm going to really believe that if Hackworth gets this job, it's not going to have Diego's fingerprints all over the sporting department now.
I agree.
And
I don't need to add anything. I think you nailed it there, Matt.
Yeah. So there's a question about when did Tom Bogert tweet this out? It was October 21st. It was literally right after the player options were announced. He put his article in The Athletic. He's back at The Athletic. So he put his article up about the decisions. And then he specifically said, and I'll drop his exact quote in the chat, most interesting timing of this before naming a GM points to what I've heard from sources around MLS. Club president Diego Gigliani likely will have more impact on sporting decisions. He hears valid things. If he hears that, there's a reason that he's been hearing that. So if you're in the YouTube chat, that's what Tom Bogert tweeted out. We could probably speculate for days on end. It's probably good to wrap it up because at this point, I think we voiced our frustrations. We voiced our concerns. We hope that this is addressed soon. And we collectively agree, you and me agree, that Diego does not have the experience to be the person to have any say in sporting decisions. He has the experience maybe to strategically run an organization, to be the business guy, which does have sporting departments roll up to the business. You have to align the strategy of the organization, and I'm okay with that. But I need a sporting director to have autonomy. I need a sporting director with experience. I need a sporting director. I don't care what experience at this point. Like you're wearing me down here. I could take international experience. I could take MLS experience. I just need a sporting director with experience. You give me that. You give that sporting director autonomy, and you let them continue to open up the purse strings like we have been over the past few transfer windows. And you let that person bring in who they want to bring in and craft the sporting side, the players to what they want to build. And Diego okays money from ownership. He approves okay, you're selling me. You've sold me on this player being that person. That's as far as it goes. That's the GM and the president. If you just go back to like a business, right? This is the person at the top. This is the person who has the VPs under them. They've got the chief whatever officers under them, the Matt Seebecks under them, and they have these report outs, right? They have these, you give information to them, you tell them what you're doing in your department, you tell them what their approach is. They ask questions, they might poke holes, they might not approve something if they really don't think it aligns with the organization. But the people with the experience in the areas that they are over are under Diego. Diego is that person who's approving or, like I said, asking questions of all those things. It's probably a way too condensed, way too uh, uh, shortened way of giving what I think his role should be or is, or what a leader of that caliber in an organization should do. But you have to rely on the experts if you're Diego in that position, and the experts in the sporting department are not Diego.
Yep. Completely agree. Matt, I think we'll call it a day after that. I know we had more planned. There was good news to be shared about City 2, but that game hasn't been announced. At least I hadn't last time I looked.
Yeah, I'm gonna end it right now. So City 2 faces Minnesota United 2 on Sunday at 5. They
Oh, thanks.
chose Minnesota United 2. They've got a good record against Minnesota United 2, 3-0 this season with 2 wins and a PK shootout win. So they've always fared well. Show up to Energizer Park Sunday at 5. City 2 has a fantastic opportunity ahead of them in the Western Conference semifinals, and we root them on while we deal with all this uncertainty and follow along with City's offseason.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for this, and I hope a final. I've got a buddy in Philly that I used to do shows, the USL show with. If it's a Philly City 2 matchup in the final,
Ooh.
we're going to have a fun with that one. I think we're going to have to do a show or something. So, all right. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you hear that we're open to all possibilities here. We're just scared about one little tiny possibility. So I think we as fans should stand up for what we believe strongly in. I believe strongly in this one, so that's why, I wanted to make a stink. Matt, I think, feels pretty strongly about it too. So thanks for listening and joining, and please send us comments and thoughts if you disagree with us. We need to hear that right now for sure. Otherwise, again, thanks for listening. We'll be talking to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, recording is out.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. That was a super long episode, but we
Great
got
comment.
it in. Great comments in the chat. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back when there's news. Beyond this, this is our season ender of sorts, but if there's news, I'll be back. Pull in Phil or Stu or Santi or whoever to discuss the sporting director, head coach, signings. We're not done for the year, but this is the last one we can for sure say will be an absolute regular during the week. So thank you so much for joining us during the season. I think we've made it through 86 episodes so far, which is crazy for this calendar year. I think we're over like 300, 320 or something total episodes over the course of our history. It's great. We appreciate everybody staying with us. So thank you. Continue asking us questions. We're going to continue bringing you whenever there's news.
A lot of work from this guy, those 86 episodes, tons of work. So
It's been a long year. It's been a tough year personally, professionally, hobby, but I think this is a stalwart thing, and I'm just happy to be doing it. Happy to be able to do it. No matter the good or the bad things to talk about. So yeah, no next show hopefully will be after the sporting director's announced, but we'll see if there's any news before then. And if there is, we'll be here. Bye everybody. Thank you.